dictionaries slowly brought about more regularity in spelling. During the 18th century, ways of spelling that differed from these dictionaries were seen as incorrect and a sign of stupidity or a bad education. Even today, many people do not like making spelling mistakes and often use the spell check tool on their computers. Dictionaries were not unknown before the 17th century, but they were Latin-English ones. The first English-English dictionary appeared in 1604 and was written by a schoolteacher called Robert Corddry. It was called A Table Alphabetical and was a list of about 2,500 hard, usual English words, with explanations of their meaning and sometimes which language they had come from, French or Greek. Here are some examples of the words in the table. French. Accomplish, finish or make an end of. Barbarian, a rude person. Eclipse, Greek. A failing of the light of the sun or moon. Obsolete, old, past date, grown out of use or custom. A table alphabetical became very popular, and similar dictionaries followed. In the 18th century, dictionary writers began explaining more ordinary words, not just difficult ones. In 1746, a group of booksellers asked a young writer called Samuel Johnson to prepare an English dictionary. Johnson worked on this dictionary for 9 years, with the help of 6 other people. For 3 years, he read the works of hundreds of English writers and found examples for words in the dictionary. Then he began to write the meanings of the words. He chose hard words, but also many ordinary ones. When Johnson's A Dictionary of the English Language appeared in 1755, it was an immediate success. It explained more than 42,000 words, and, as well as the meaning of each word, it gave the pronunciation and history of the word, and sometimes how it was used. A cant word was used only by one group. A low word was informal and not suitable for writing. Johnson gave as many different meanings of a word as he could. There are 66 for take. He very often gave an example from literature to show how the word was used. In fact, there are about 114,000 examples in the dictionary, and they are a very large part of it. Most of them come from literature written between 1560 and 1660. Here are some examples of words and their meanings from Johnson's dictionary. To bubble, to cheat, a cant word. To nab, nappa, Swedish. To catch unexpectedly, to seize without warning, a word seldom used but in low language. Woman, weefman, weeman, Saxon, whence we yet pronounce women in the plural, women. The female of the human race. That man who hath a tongue is no man, if with his tongue he cannot win a woman. Shakespeare. Yellow boy, a gold coin. A very low word. To bubble and yellow boy have both disappeared from English, but to nab has survived with this meaning. It is still an informal word. The dictionary was not perfect. Some of Johnson's explanations were harder to understand than the words themselves. Some expressed his personal opinions, and some words were not listed because he disliked them. Also, he could not fit in all his examples, so words at the end of the dictionary have fewer examples than those at the beginning. However, it remained the most important English dictionary in Britain for more than a century. Help with spelling came from dictionaries. Help with grammar came from grammars. There had been a few grammar books in the 16th and 17th centuries, but in the second half of the 18th century, a very large number suddenly appeared. Many of them told the reader how to write and speak correctly, which really meant how to use language in the same way as in serious pieces of literature. They were written for the rich, and aimed to show the difference between the upper and lower classes. They were widely used because people wanted to show that they were educated. The writers of these grammar books considered that the grammar of much spoken language and of regional dialects, especially Scots, was wrong. They believed that the grammar of English should be the same as that of Latin. For example, they thought that a sentence should not end with a preposition, because this did not happen in Latin. So it would be correct to say, "I like the town in which I live," but not, "I like the town which I live in." The two most widely used grammar books were Robert Louth's Short Introduction to English Grammar, which appeared in 1762, and Lindley Murray's English Grammar of 1795. These books had a great effect on people's views of grammar in the 19th and 20th centuries, and still have some effect today. Some people believe that there is only one correct way of saying things, and argue, for example, about whether it is correct to say different to or different from. As a result, many first-language speakers of English think that the way they speak and write is incorrect, and are ashamed of it. The opposite view, that all ways of expressing an idea are grammatically correct if they can be understood clearly, and that grammar is always changing, is becoming more popular. As a result, some grammar books today simply describe how English is used, instead of telling us how we should speak or write. There were also some attempts in the second half of the 18th century to decide on one correct pronunciation. There were many different ways of pronouncing words, as there were a large number of regional accents. Until this time, regional accents were not considered to be bad in any way or to be a disadvantage. However, many people now wanted to speak correctly as well as write correctly. The first person to teach people correct English pronunciation was an Irishman called Thomas Sheridan. In the 1750s and 1760s, he gave talks to large numbers of important people about the correct sounds and pronunciation of English words. Like correct spelling and grammar, correct pronunciation was a sign of education and class. Sheridan wrote in one of his talks,
"Pronunciation is a sort of proof that a person has kept good company."
Sheridan was followed by John Walker, who wrote A Critical Pronouncing Dictionary and Expositor of the English Language in 1791. He took the pronunciation of educated people in London as his guide, and saw other regional pronunciations as wrong. His dictionary was very successful in both Britain and the US in the 19th century. Many people began to feel disadvantaged because they did not speak correctly. It was a long time before regional accents became acceptable again. Chapter 8. Modern English Grows. If speakers of English from 1800 were able to speak to those of today, they would notice a few differences in grammar and pronunciation, but not very many. For the 19th century speakers, the biggest problem would be the extremely large number of new words they would meet. The developments in science in the last 200 years have led to hundreds of thousands of new words and expressions for new ideas, machines, materials, plants, animals, stars, diseases, and medicines. Many of these words and expressions are used only by scientists, but others have become part of ordinary English. We know that if we have bronchitis, this word first appeared in writing in 1814, We can take antibiotics, 1944. And we know that our genes, 1911, come to us from our parents in our DNA, 1944. We argue about whether we should use pesticides, 1934, in farming, or nuclear energy, 1945, to make electricity. The use of English in different parts of the world, and easier and faster communication, have together resulted in the appearance of thousands of other new words. Most of them, about 65%, have been made by putting two old words together, for example, fingerprint, 1859, airport, 1919, and streetwise, 1965. The world of computers has introduced many of this type. Online, 1950, user-friendly, 1977, and download, 1980. Some new words have been made from Latin and Greek. For example, photograph, 1839, helicopter, 1872, aeroplane, 1874, and video, 1958. Others are old words that have been given new meanings. For example, pilot, 1907, was first used to mean the person who directs the path of ships, and cassette, 1960, used to mean a small box. About 5% of new words have come from foreign languages, like disco, 1964, from French, and pizza, 1935, from Italian. And a few words have come from the names of things we buy or use. For example, to Google, 1999, from Google, the popular internet search engine, and podcast, 2004. This word, meaning a recording that you can get from the internet and play on your computer, comes from iPod, the popular music player, and broadcast. Beginnings or endings have been added to make new words. Disinformation, 1955, is false information. Touchy-feely, 1972, describes people who express their feelings too openly. Sometimes both a beginning and an ending have been added. For example, unputdownable, 1947, describes a book which is so interesting that you cannot stop reading it. Some words have been shortened. Photo, 1860, for photograph. Plane, 1908, for aeroplane. And TV, 1948, for television. Some words have put together sounds from two other words. For example, motel, 1925, a hotel for car drivers, is made from motor and hotel. Only a very few new words have not been made from other words. Two examples are nylon, 1938, to describe a man-made material, and flip-flop, 1970, a type of shoe that makes a noise as you walk. The growth in vocabulary is clear when we look at the making of the Oxford English Dictionary, OED, in the 19th and 20th centuries. This dictionary contains all English words since 1150, even those that are no longer used. It shows, with examples, when each word was first used in writing, and how the meaning of a word has changed over the centuries. Finding all this information was a very big job, although no one realised at the beginning exactly how big. A Scotsman called James Murray was appointed as the Director of Work on the dictionary in 1879, and the plan was to finish the job in 10 years. Murray organised a very large reading programme. Hundreds of people sent him examples of how words were used. After 5 years, the first part of the dictionary was completed, but it only went from A to ANT. Everyone realised that the job was going to take a lot longer than 10 years. In fact, it took another 44. Sadly, Murray did not live to see its completion. He died in 1915, aged 78, while he was working on the letter U. However, he knew that he had helped to make a dictionary which would give a detailed history of the English language. The first OED was completed in 1928 and explained the meaning and history of 414,800 words and expressions, with examples from literature and other writing. The second OED, completed in 1989, explained the meanings of 615,100 words, although many of these, perhaps 20%, are no longer used. It shows how the words were or are used, and has 2.5 million examples from all kinds of books. It contains some scientific words, and words from North America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Caribbean, India, and Pakistan, but not all scientific or regional words in English. The second OED went online in 2000, and every 3 months new material is added to this online dictionary as part of the writing of the third OED. At the same time, work is continuing on the words and meanings already in the dictionary, and changes are made if necessary. For some words, there are more details of their history to add, or earlier or later examples. North American and other regional pronunciations are given, as well as British ones. These are the first changes to Murray's work since the first OED appeared in 1928. The work on the third OED, begun in 1993, will probably finish in 2018. The OED has had a great effect on our knowledge and understanding of English. It has given us a lot of information about the history of words and expressions, and has helped us understand how language changes over time. The way dictionaries are made has been changed by computers. There are now extremely large collections of examples of English works on computer that dictionary writers can use. They can look through these for examples of words and see how they are used, and they can use the internet to search for words. They can also ask readers all over the world to send examples to a website, which means that they can get words from a very wide variety of places. Information about informal words and slang, for example, is now much easier to find because of the internet. And when a dictionary is written, it can be kept on computer and put on a website. For about the past 100 years, new words have been able to travel fast around the English-speaking world because of the telephone, newspapers, radio, television, films, pop music, and the internet. These ways of communication can reach extremely large numbers of people. Television and radio have also influenced pronunciation. In the 1920s, the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, chose an accent for all its speakers to use on the radio. This was the accent of the educated, people in government, at the universities, in the army and the church. It was known as Received Pronunciation, or RP, or the King's English. The use of RP on radio and later on television meant that more people heard it and thought that it was the accent that socially important people used. It was not acceptable to use strong regional accents on television and radio, or in teaching and government. However, in the 1960s, social differences in Britain began to break down, and regional accents became more acceptable everywhere. And as the number of radio and television programs grew, more people with different accents had to be employed. Today, RP is no longer an important accent, and most educated people in England, not Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, now speak a kind of RP which has some of their regional accent in it. Television has also made some regional dialects popular. For example, you can now hear parts of the dialect called Estuary English, which is from London and the southeast of England, in many other parts of England. See Chapter 10 for more about dialects. The biggest technological development in recent years is, of course, the Internet. People can now communicate in writing on their websites, through email, on message boards, and in chat rooms. The Internet has had a number of effects on English. Firstly, new words have been made to describe the Internet itself and its activities. For example, cyberspace, 1982, email, 1982, website, 1993, and blog, 1999. Or, new meanings have been given to old words, for example, link, 1951, chat, 1985, virtual, 1987, and surf, 1992. Secondly, people have developed a new, informal way of writing in chat rooms and on message boards. Many users shorten a lot of words, using just single letters or numbers, and often they do not use capital letters or much punctuation. Many use their own spellings, or spellings that are often used in chat rooms. Some people also use smileys, little pictures of faces with different expressions, to show how they feel. They also use groups of letters for some expressions. For example, LOL means laughing out loud. BTW means by the way. BBL means be back later. Sentences you could see in a chat room or on a message board are RUALRYT, are you all right? I am good, THX smiley. I'm good, thanks. DUZ, NE1, know how to make carrot cake. Does anyone know how to make carrot cake? People also use similar language when they send messages by phone. For example, THX 4 UR MSG stop. How are you? Thanks for your message. How are you? I am fine stop. See you at work. I'm fine. See you at work. After learning the rules of written English at school, many people are now enjoying playing with language, breaking the old rules and making new ones. Chapter 9. English in the US. England and America are two countries separated by the same language, wrote George Bernard Shaw in 1942. Is this true today? Do Americans speak a different kind of English from the British? If so, why? And why do they speak English at all? To answer the last question, we must go back to the year 1607, when a group of English people sailed across the Atlantic and reached the east coast of America. They called their settlement Jamestown, after King James I, and they called that part of the country Virginia. They were not the first English people in America. In 1585 and 1587, people had tried to settle on the island of Roanoke, in what is now North Carolina. They were not the first Europeans to settle in America either. The Spanish had lived in Florida since 1565. But the people of Jamestown were the first successful English settlers, and they were followed by other English adventurers who also settled in Virginia. Then, in 1620, more English settlers landed north of Virginia in what became Massachusetts, New England. These were the people from the ship called the Mayflower, who came because they wanted to follow a different kind of Christianity from the kind in England. Others followed, and by 1640, About 25,000 English people were living in New England. At this time, sailors from England and other European countries were taking Africans to America and selling them as slaves. The first 20 African slaves were brought to America in 1619. The Africans had to live in terrible conditions during the long sea voyage, and many did not survive. This inhuman business was ended in 1808, but people were allowed to own slaves until the end of the American Civil War in 1865. By that time, there were more than 4 million Africans living in America. During the 17th and 18th centuries, more and more people arrived in America. The British government sent prisoners to America as a punishment, and other settlers arrived from France, Germany, the Caribbean, and the north of Ireland. The people from the north of Ireland were called the Scots-Irish, because their families had moved to Ireland from Scotland. By the year of American independence, 1776, about 1 in 7 settlers in America was Scots-Irish. In the 19th century, large numbers of people left Ireland, Germany, Italy, and other European countries for America. Many were Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. By 1900, there were 75 million people living in America. In the latter part of the 20th century, people from Asia and Spanish-speaking countries also arrived, and by 2000, there were more than 280 million people in America. American English developed from the languages used by these different people. The first English settlers immediately discovered animals, birds, and plants that were new to them, and which needed names in English. Sometimes the settlers used English words, for example, blackbird, for a bird that looked similar to the English blackbird. Sometimes they made new words from other English words, for example, backwoods, a forest with few people, and bluegrass, a kind of grass with blue-green leaves. They also named thousands of places and rivers using words from the languages of the Native Americans, for example, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Potomac. The Spanish and French controlled some parts of the country until the 19th century, so some place names are from French, like Detroit, St. Louis, and Illinois, and some from Spanish, like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Santa Fe. New York was first New Amsterdam, until the English took it in 1664. And the names Brooklyn, from Brooklyn, Harlem, Haarlem, and the Bronx, Bronx, are reminders of its Dutch beginnings. Occasionally, the English settlers borrowed words for things or people from other European languages, for example, cookie from Dutch, cent and dime from French, plaza from Spanish. The settlers also began to give some old words new meanings. For example, bill began to mean a piece of paper money, and it replaced note. Some words from the English of the 17th century survive in American English, but are not used now in British English. For example, fall meaning autumn, mad meaning angry, and gotten as the past participle of get, as in, your dinner has gotten cold. Some of the pronunciation of the first settlers also survives in modern American English. They pronounce the A in grass, as in hat, because the long R sound only began to be used instead of in England in the 18th century. This short is part of American pronunciation today. Most Americans also pronounce the R at the end of words, for example, car, and before a consonant, for example, hard, as the early settlers did. As the settlers moved west in the 19th century, they added many colourful new expressions to American English. These are now part of British English too. For example, to face the music, to accept the unpleasant results of your actions, to kick the bucket, to die, hot under the collar, angry. Some expressions come from the time when the railroads were built. To go off the rails, to behave strangely, and to reach the end of the line, to be unable to do any more with something. American English has borrowed only a few words from the languages spoken by the 19th century immigrants. The reason for this is social. People who had recently arrived in the US wanted to become American, and they and their children learned English to do so. However, some words and expressions from other languages have found their way into American English. For example, check, a bill for food or drinks, and kindergarten, a place where very young children play and learn, have come from German. Pasta, spaghetti, and other words for food have come from Italian. From Yiddish, the language of the East European Jews, there are schmuck, a stupid person, and schlepp, to pull, or a long, tiring journey. African Americans developed their own varieties of English, which are all known today as African American English or Black English. They had an effect on American English, especially in the 20th century, when large numbers of African Americans left the South and moved north. Some words that they brought to American English are jazz, a kind of music first developed by African Americans, cool, meaning excellent, and dude, another word for man. At the time of independence in 1776, Americans began to take an interest in their language. They wanted to be separate from Britain in every way, and to feel proud of their country and way of life. Someone who felt very proud of American English was a teacher called Noah Webster, 1758 to 1843. Between 1783 and 1785, Webster wrote a speller, a grammar, and a reader for American schools. The speller was later sold as the American Spelling Book and was extremely successful, selling more than 80 million copies in the next 100 years. With the money from the speller, Webster was able to write dictionaries. In these, he wanted to show that American English was as good as British English, and that Americans did not have to copy the British. His first dictionary appeared in 1806, followed in 1828 by his famous work, An American Dictionary of the English Language. This was longer than Johnson's dictionary. It explained about 70,000 words, and so gave American English the same importance as British English in the minds of Americans. 60 years earlier, Benjamin Franklin had suggested many changes to English spelling, and his ideas influenced Webster. In both his dictionaries, Webster suggested new spellings, and many of these are now the accepted American spellings. For example, center, C-E-N-T-E-R, colour, C-O-L-O-R, and travelled, T-R-A-V-E-L-E-D. Some of his other suggestions were not followed. S-O-O-P, soup, B-R-E-D, bread, and M-E-D-I-C-I-N, medicine, for example. Webster also influenced American pronunciation by saying that each part of a word must be clearly pronounced. For example, secretary, not secretary. So, what are the differences between American and British English today? As well as differences in pronunciation, there are some small differences in grammar and spelling. But the main difference is in vocabulary. Thousands of words are used differently. Firstly, different words are sometimes used in American and British English to talk about the same thing. For example, the street-level floor of a building is called the first floor in American English and the ground floor in British English. You drive on the freeway in the US, but on the motorway in Britain. There are also different expressions in American and British English. For example, the American expressions to drop the ball, to make a mistake, to be in the chips, to suddenly have a lot of money, and to go south, to become less valuable, are not used in British English. Similarly, many British expressions are not part of American English. Some British people dislike the effect of American English on British English, but this has not stopped thousands of American words entering British English and becoming completely accepted. For example, OK, 1840, supermarket, 1933, teenager, 1941, and fast food, 1951. Although there are clear differences between the American and British varieties of English, television, music, films, and more recently the Internet have helped people on both sides of the Atlantic to understand each other's English more easily. Chapter 10. All kinds of English.
I'm ganning down the toon the day.
I'm going into town today, northeastern England.
Dinna fash yoursel.
Don't upset yourself. Central and southern Scotland.
They work hard, isn't it?
They work hard, don't they? Wales.
I'm after seeing him.
I've just seen him. Ireland.
Y'all come here.
Come here, everyone. Southern US.
It's a beaut.
It's wonderful. Australia.
She sing real good.
She sings very well. Jamaica. I am not knowing. I don't know. India. Make you no mine, Take no notice of him or her. Nigeria. All over the world, people speaking English as a first or second language use different vocabulary, grammar, and accents in a large number of varieties of English. A variety of English is a type of English spoken by one group of people. In each English-speaking country, one variety of English is used nationally. This is the standard English of that country. It is taught in schools and spoken on radio and television. Everyone in the country uses the same grammar, vocabulary, and spelling when they use their country's standard English, though they may speak it with different accents. Different countries have different standard Englishes. For example, standard Australian English is different from standard British English. In England, as well as standard British English, there are regional and social dialects of English. The most noticeable differences between them are those of pronunciation. A well-known difference is the sound of the vowel A in words like grass. In the south, grass is pronounced as grass, and in the north as grass. The vowel U in words like up is pronounced up in the south and up in the north. In some parts of the north, happy is pronounced as happy or happy, and in the northeast, night is pronounced as neat. In estuary English, which began in the southeast of England, some sounds are pronounced in the same way as in Cockney, the dialect of East London. The t in the middle and at the end of words disappears, so the word better becomes better, and the word what becomes what. Th becomes f, and th becomes v. So think becomes fink, and mother becomes mother. This dialect has become popular among young people because of radio and television. Many new British dialects are developing. People from the Caribbean, India, Pakistan and Eastern Europe have settled in the big cities in Britain. Young people from these groups use some of their own languages with the local dialect, their friends copy them, and in this way they make a new dialect. There are also differences in grammar between the dialects. Some of the older dialects from the countryside use grammatical forms which standard English has lost. For example, thee and thou for you singular. Modern dialects also use grammar that is different from standard English. I don't want no dinner. I don't want any dinner. Them books. Those books. She ain't come. She hasn't come. And in some dialects, young people use innit at the end of a sentence. For example, now I can start calling you that, innit, can't I? We need to go now, innit, don't we? All dialects have some words and expressions, both old and new, that are different from standard English. For example, butty, a piece of bread and butter, has been used in the north of England since the 19th century. Nang, good, has come in recently to Cockney in London from Bengali. Outside England, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, there are other varieties of English. Scots is very different from standard British English, more so than any other British variety. There are many differences in pronunciation, grammar and vocabulary. Some Scots vocabulary is also used in Northern English dialects. For example, bairn for child and lass for girl. But a very large number of words, 20,000 are listed in one book, are used only in Scots. The English spoken in Wales also has its own character. The voice rises and falls in a way which is similar to Welsh, and there are some words and expressions which have been borrowed from Welsh. Sometimes word order is changed to give something more importance. For example, great those are. Those are great. In Northern Ireland, Scots has had a great effect on English because large numbers of settlers came to Ireland from Scotland in the 17th century. For example, wee, a Scots word meaning little, is used. In the Republic of Ireland, Gaelic and dialects from the west of England have had the most effect on English. Gaelic is still spoken in the west of Ireland, and the dialects of English in this part of the country show its effect more strongly than others. For example, people say, "Is it cold you are?" "Are you cold?" Or, "He's after doing that." He's just done that. The Irish English spoken on radio and television is closer to standard British English. From the 17th century onwards, regional varieties of English were taken to North America, the Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, Africa and Asia, and they can still be heard in the varieties of English in these places. For example, in some dialects of American English, there are many similarities to Irish English in pronunciation and some in grammar. Use, which means you plural, comes from Irish English, and so does any more in positive sentences. For example, they live here anymore, which is they live here now in British English. The three main regional dialects of American English are Northern, Midland and Southern. These show the movement of settlers to the west. Settlers from New England in the northeast moved past the Great Lakes. Those from the middle of the east coast moved through the middle of the country, and those in the south went along the coast to the south. Because the Midland dialect is spoken over the largest area, and by perhaps 2/3 of the people, this dialect is the best known outside America and is sometimes called General American. African American English, or Black English, was born between the 17th and 19th centuries, when millions of people from West Africa were brought to America and the Caribbean to work as slaves on large farms growing cotton and sugar. The slave buyers and the African slaves communicated on the slave ships in Pidgin English, a simple kind of English that allowed speakers of different languages to communicate with each other. When the Africans arrived in America and the Caribbean, they continued to use Pidgin English both with the slave owners and with each other, as they often spoke different African languages. Later, this Pidgin English developed into a Creole language when the slaves' children and grandchildren started to use it as their first language. African American English probably developed from this Creole. Today, African American English has some grammatical differences from American English. For example, she come, she's coming. You crazy, you're crazy. 20 cent, 20 cents. French, Dutch, Spanish and Portuguese Creoles have also had a big effect on the English of the Caribbean. Other influences have been local languages and Hindi spoken by settlers from India. In the Caribbean today, there are a large number of English Creoles, as well as local varieties of Standard English. Each Creole has a different vocabulary, but their grammar and pronunciation are similar. For example, there is de for the, ting for thing, and ax for ask. Here is part of a poem in Jamaican Creole by Louise Bennett. It is called "No Lickle Twang," not even a little accent. In it, the poet complains that her son has come back from America without an American accent.
If you want to please him, make him think you bring back something new. You always call him Pa. This evening when him come, say Pooh.
If you want to please him, your father, make him think you've brought back something new. You always call him Pa. This evening when he comes, say Pooh. The English of Canada is similar to both American and British English. It uses some British words and some American ones. For example, Canadians fill their cars with gas, American English, but ask for the bill, British English. They often add "eh" to the end of a sentence. For example, "It's cold, eh?" The pronunciation of Canadian English is very close to that of American English, but one difference is the pronunciation of ow, which Canadians pronounce as o in some words, so the word about sounds like a boat. Australian English has developed from a number of varieties of English. Most of the 130,000 prisoners sent to Australia between 1788 and 1840, and the free settlers who joined them, came from the south and east of England, Scotland and Ireland. The vowels in Australian English sound similar to those in Cockney. For example, to die sounds similar to RP, to die, and some Australian expressions are from British, Irish and American English. American words are starting to be used more as a result of American films and television programs. Some words for plants and animals and many place names have come from Aboriginal languages. There are many very colourful expressions in Australian English. For example, to be as full as a boot, to be very drunk. First in, best dressed. The first people to do something will have an advantage. Couldn't lie straight in bed, to be very dishonest. New Zealand English and South African English have some similarities to Australian English in their pronunciation, because all three countries were settled by English speakers at about the same time. Each variety has small pronunciation differences, though, and its own vocabulary. In New Zealand English, there are words from Maori, and in South African English, there are words from Afrikaans and African languages. Other countries were also governed by the British in the 19th and 20th centuries. For example, India, Singapore, Nigeria, Kenya, Papua New Guinea. Others were governed by the US, the Philippines and Puerto Rico. In many of these countries, English is an official language, although it is not most people's first language. In these countries, the local languages and their regional dialects have an effect on the pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary and use of English, and new varieties of English develop. These are sometimes called new Englishes. They have not been studied very deeply or for very long, so it is difficult to get a clear picture of each variety. However, people are collecting information about these new varieties and studying them, so in future we will know more about them. In the newest varieties of English, words from another language are very often used with English ones. These varieties are often given amusing names. For example, in the US, some Spanish speakers speak Spanglish, which uses English and Spanish words in the same sentence. English words are borrowed and given Spanish sounds and spelling, such as parquín, parking. Other examples of these varieties are Singlish in Singapore, Hinglish in India, Hindi and English, and Taglish in the Philippines, Tagalog and English. All these varieties of English, from countries where English is used either as a first language or as a second language, are used more and more by writers and filmmakers. In this way, many users of English are able to hear and read more than their own variety, and words and expressions can cross from one variety to another. Chapter 11. Jargon and Slang. Jargon and slang are kinds of English that are not part of standard English. Jargon is the difficult or strange language used by a group of people to describe things that the rest of us do not know about. For example, doctors, lawyers, university teachers, and business managers all use words and expressions that the rest of us do not understand. In business, some of this jargon comes from the world of the Internet. For example, if you are in a big meeting with someone and they suggest discussing something with you offline, they mean they want to talk to you privately later. Other management jargon is not from the world of computers. For example, a manager could ask you, "What could you bring to the table if you got this job? Can you think outside the box?" This means, what could you give to our team? Can you think in unusual ways to find answers to problems? There is also a lot of jargon in sports that is only understood by people who do these sports. For example, if you are not a mountain biker, you will probably not know what a bunny hop is. It is a jump that mountain bikers make when they come off the ground with both wheels. Bunny is an informal word for rabbit, a small animal that jumps a lot. People use jargon because they need to describe very detailed things or ideas, and the rest of us have to try and understand it. Slang is an extremely informal kind of language, much more informal than jargon. It is usually only spoken. Jargon is often written as well as spoken. Slang usually belongs to a group of people who use it to show that they belong to that group, and that others do not. Sometimes they need language that others will not understand. For example, young people, people in prison, and people in the army all have their own kinds of slang. Slang is colourful, funny, and often cruel. It gives us new words for things we already have words for. For example, rock up for arrive. Jargon, on the other hand, often gives us new words for new things or ideas. Most slang changes quite quickly because the people who use it need to make new words to keep confusing outsiders. But some slang lasts longer. Pig for policeman has been used since 1800. Other words become part of the informal language. For example, row, meaning noisy argument, was slang in Britain in the 18th century. Some slang words become part of standard English. For example, joke, meaning something that someone says to make people laugh, was a slang word at the end of the 17th century. Other slang words change their meaning over time. For example, in American English, previous meant arriving too soon in the 1900s. In 1920, it meant tight of clothes. And in the 1970s, it meant a bit rude. The slang used by African American musicians has had a great effect on British slang since the Second World War. This effect has grown recently as American rap music, with its fast-spoken rhymes, has become popular around the world. Words from the US can now reach Britain in weeks through the internet and television. For example, awesome, wicked, and bad, meaning excellent, have been widely used by young people in Britain, but they were first used in the US. Many slang words show that you like or dislike something. For example, in British slang, lush means lovely, boom means the very best, and minging means bad. In Britain, a stupid person is called a div. In the US, a dummy. In Australia, a dill or a boofhead. A pretty but stupid girl is a bimbo in Britain and the US. A boring person is a dweeb in the US. A lazy man is a bludger in Australia. A good-looking person is spunky in Australia or buff in the US and Britain. The basic things in life are often given slang words. Food is grub in Britain and the US, a word that has been used since the 17th century, and tucker in Australia. Money is wonga or dough in Britain, green or moolah in the US. There are also many words for having no money, being drunk, being sick, crimes and criminals, the police, and different parts of the body. Australians are very proud of their slang and often use it. It has many shortened words. For example, arvo for afternoon, Aussie for Australian, brekkie for breakfast, and sunnies for sunglasses. The Cockneys of East London are also proud of their rhyming slang, which is now widely used. In this slang, part of the slang expression rhymes with the word in standard English. For example, garden plant means aunt, plates of meat means feet, bread and honey means money. It can become more difficult to understand when the rhyming word is not used. For example, I need some bread means I need some money. Today, most new rhyming slang uses famous names. For example, Britney Spears means beers. Rhyming slang is also used in Australia and the US. New slang words are always appearing and disappearing. Some words are used only by the small groups that made them. Others become part of national or international slang, and others cross into ordinary spoken language. In this way, slang is an important source of new words in standard English. Chapter 12. The Future of English. It's good that everything's gone except their language, which is everything. Derek Walcott, North and South, 1982. We no longer control English in any meaningful way. It is no longer our ship, but the sea. Andrew Marr, 1998. The Jamaican poet Derek Walcott knows that English is still used in countries that were governed by Britain. The British journalist Andrew Marr recognises that English does not belong just to the British or Americans, but to the whole world. English continues to be used by speakers of other languages all over the world, and to be changed by those languages. But how will this situation change in the future? In Britain, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, English will remain the first language of most people, but will continue to change. New slang and dialects will develop, often from groups of people who speak other languages, for example, Spanish in the US, and South Asian languages in Britain. In countries where English is used as a second language, it is possible that new languages will develop which use English and local languages. An example of this is Sheng, a new Kenyan language, which uses words from English, Swahili, and other African languages. One guess is that the number of people who can use English well will continue to grow, to over half the people in the world by 2050, some believe, and that English will remain a world language for many years. In this view, the US will remain the richest country in the world, American popular music and films will continue to be fashionable, and English will still be the language of science, communications technology, international business, education at universities, and television news. English will continue to change, but it will not lose its importance in the world. However, other people think that the future of English as a world language is not so certain. Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, and Arabic may become other world languages, as the numbers of people who speak these languages continue to grow, and the countries where they are spoken become richer. Although international business may grow, some of it may be with countries in the same part of the world, and other shared languages may be used instead of English. There are now more users of the Internet who do not speak English as a first language than those who do. So, businesses and organisations have to provide information and services in different languages for these Internet users. In education, international students may go to countries that are nearby. For example, more Asian students may go to China. English may also lose its importance and popularity in the world of films and music. If English remains a world language, some governments may try to stop its use in their own countries. They may fear that the use of English will endanger their own languages and customs. Some countries have already tried to stop the borrowing of English words by passing laws against the use of foreign words in some situations. For example, France in 1977 and 1994, and Poland in 1997. In other countries, India for example, there is much discussion about teaching children in English in schools. Some consider it harmful for the children's learning, and also for the survival of their own languages. Others, however, think that it is necessary for the country's future survival in the world. If English does remain a world language, how will it change? Will it break up into a number of different languages, as Latin developed into French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and Italian? Or will the different varieties disappear, and only one kind of English survive? It seems probable that as English is used internationally more and more, the need for a standard grammar and vocabulary, Standard spelling rules and some standard pronunciation will remain. Perhaps a new, simpler kind of world standard English will develop from the regional varieties, one which all users can easily use and understand. If a sound is hard for people to make, and words can be understood without it, then it could disappear. For example, th is difficult for many speakers and does not have to be pronounced as th or the, so this sound could change. On the other hand, it seems that the number of regional varieties of English is growing and will continue to grow. These varieties may become more and more different from the world standard kind of English, although they may not become separate languages because they will have a lot of contact with standard kinds of English through television, radio, and the internet. As the number of second and foreign language speakers of English grows larger than the number of first language speakers, other languages will have a greater effect on English. Extremely large numbers of words from other languages will probably continue to cross into English at great speed. The next step in the history of the English language is hard to see clearly because it depends on many things. Changes in business, science, technology, and numbers of people. Will the speakers of English at the end of this century speak a very different English from the one we use now? Who will use it? And how? These are interesting questions for all users of English.